Hi, my name is Steph, and today I'm going to help you upgrade the Synctool. But before we begin, let us check some prerequisites. So the first prerequisite is that your Windows server has .NET version 4.8 or higher. So in order to check this, you open up the registry and you go to the path of the local machine, software, Microsoft, Net Framework Setup, NDP v4 full, and then you check for the version if it states version 4.8 or higher. If this version is not installed, please install it first, reboot your server, and then come back. So the second prerequisite is that you are aware of where the current Synctool configuration is, because you need to back it up. So in order to find your Synctool configuration, the easiest way is when you're on the server that hosts the Synctool, you open up the Windows Task Scheduler and you find either in the Task Scheduler library or in a separate Zivver folder the scheduled tasks that are used to run the Synctool daily. So in order to find the Synctool configuration, you just select one of the task schedulers or the scheduled tasks and you go to Actions. When you click Actions, under Details, you'll see where the Synctool is running from, and you also see which profile, Synctool profile, is being used. So in this case, we only see -P, which stands for profile, shared mailbox synchronization. So there's no path stated here. If there's no path stated here, then that means it's stored in the app data for the user that is running this task. So we need to go to the app data of the user that's listed under general. And here we see the SA Zivver account. So that means that the Synctool configuration is stored in the app data of the service account Zivver. So in order to find it, you open up File Explorer and you browse to Users, Service Account, and then the app data. Make sure you have the hidden items in the View tab enabled in order to find the app data, and there you'll find the shared mailboxes. So here you can also make a backup of your profiles before we continue with the update of the Synctool. So if in any case anything goes wrong, you can still go back to the synchronization profiles as they were with the old version without having to have any impact from the update. So you just create a new folder, you call that backup Synctool profiles, and you can just copy and paste the XML files in here. And there you have your backup. You don't need to back up the Synctool executable as that will go nowhere. So that will just stay in place. And the next step is to download the Synctool. So now we're going to start the Synctool for the first time after you've downloaded it. And we do that by just double clicking the executable. I have placed this in my documents, but if you have a separate folder, for example in your C drive, you can run it from anywhere. So I double click it and then it opens up. Let me move it into my screen here. If you double click it and nothing happens, make sure you check the prerequisite that you have Windows Server .NET 4.8 or higher. If it's not running, then it's most likely that you do not have the specified .NET version. So the first time starting it up, you should see the two configuration profiles that you also can find in your task scheduler here. If that's not the case, then you can load the settings from the location where you have the Synctool configuration stored. So feel free to do that. You can now load the Synctool configuration from anywhere on your machine. So it's not anymore bound to the app data of the user that's running it. So let's start by clicking on the first user profile. And then we see a whole new interface compared to the first one. We don't have the 4 tabs on the top, but we've distributed it on the left. And at the first start, you see the manual synchronization. So when you open up a profile, you can directly run a manual sync. However, since we came from a version that's before V2, we need to make some changes first. So let's do that. So first, let's open up the profile tab, click the arrow button down to show what's the content. And this should be transferred from your Synctool version 1 configuration profile. So let's click profile details to see what's shown here. So this is essentially the same information as step 1 from the version 1 Synctool profile. You have the profile name here. You can enter a description, and what's new is that you can now see where the configuration is stored. So this is stored in the app data of my user account, and you can even go straight to the configuration profile to make a copy or a backup if you want to. There's this new feature with the use profile password, so you can encrypt the data stored in the configuration profile with a password. And for the default configuration, I do not recommend using it right now. It's for really specific use cases, and it doesn't work with automation in Task Scheduler very well. So we're going to skip it for now. The second tab is the network proxy. I don't advise use that as well, because normally if you have a proxy, the settings are configured for the machine. So there's no need for the Synctool to make a separate proxy. It's been made for really specific use cases, so you can ignore it for now. And what may be new for some is the domain filter, where you can filter out domains to be excluded from all synchronizations. So you just enable it and you fill in an email domain, like for example, your Microsoft Online domain. So for example, zivvertest.onmicrosoft.com or contoso.com, and then the Synctool will ignore all email addresses and all email aliases that have this email domain filled in. So after the profile, we move to the target being Zivver. So that means this is where you set up your connection to the Zivver platform and specifically your Zivver organization. Here you have the API hostname and the Zivver API key that authorizes you to make any changes to your Zivver organization. And if you click the Test Connect button, then the Synctool will try to connect to our API endpoint given the API key that's in the Synctool. This should already be filled in if you had a Synctool v1 configuration file. So let's click Test Connection, and that should work. You can also see that the task pane now shows that the task was completed successfully. And if we go to the target filter, this should already be filled in coming from your old configuration profile. If it's not filled in, don't worry, you don't need to fill in anything. It should just work as normal. So there's no need to change anything in the target filter tab. And here in the data preview tab, that's also nothing new. So this was also already present. What is new is now that it also loads groups. It didn't do that in V1 and it does now in V2. And if you click load the data, it should get all your users and your functional accounts from the Zivver platform. and after the target, we're going to have a look at the sources. You don't have to change anything, so the sources should be just configured the way the V1 Synctool profile is configured, but it could be wise to make some changes, and also I want to take you through all these details. So the first thing is that we now have an overview of sources, which means that you can connect multiple sources to one Synctool profile, and you can just add them by clicking the add button, and then you get to configure a new source. So for example, here I've added the Exchange source, and now you can see there's an Exchange source added. I don't want that for now, so I'm going to delete it again. So from the Synctool version 1 profile, I still have the LDAP source here, and if I click the arrow down button, I see some more details. So the source details tell you a little bit about the name, or allow you to configure some details like the name. So for example, if you have multiple LDAP sources, you could call them LDAP1, LDAP2, etc., and give them a source description. So that's new, and it allows you to be a little bit more specific. Also, you can now configure the default phone number to be, for example, a Dutch or a UK phone number. And when we go to connection, we've broken down the previous way the Synctool looked. As you may remember from step 3, you had on the left the connection, in the center the configuration, and on the right the filters. And we've broken that down into multiple tabs and multiple pages. So here we set up the connection with our Active Directory virtual machine via LDAP. We're going to use the port 389, and we're going to use a service account to make a connection. This has all been transferred from the version 1 profile, so nothing has changed here, and we're just going to verify the connection still works. So it's trying to connect over LDAP to the server, and the green bar here shows that it worked, so that's nice. Then we're going to go to the next tab that's called users. So the internal ID, I'm going to also specify that later at the syncing tab under the user mapping feature. So the only thing you want to remember is that the value that we use for the internal ID is used for the user mapping, and I'll explain the user mapping when we come to the sync tab. So under email, you see the email address. The name is gathered from the Active Directory attribute name. You can change it to display name if you want. Just use the name that you want to use externally. The account key hasn't been changed, so does the mobile user account control. They haven't changed as well. If you're coming from an older version, then this delegates property may not be filled in. And if you're using Exchange on-premise still and don't use it in a hybrid configuration with Exchange Online, you can fill in the default attribute, Active Directory attribute, that contains the delegations to other mailboxes, which is MS Exchange delegate list link. And then you can enrich your user accounts by also synchronizing the mailbox permissions that user accounts have to other mailboxes to Zivver. And what's also new is that we split up the aliases here. So now the aliases are specified to be the lowercase SMTP addresses here from each Active Directory attribute, and we'll get the primary email address from the mail attribute. And if you're coming from an older version like version 1.4.19, it could be that you're not yet synchronizing email aliases or proxy addresses to Zivver. And with this version, you'll automatically start using that. And we'll come back to that later, what that means in terms of the synchronization. So the next tab, groups, it's not filled in because it's grayed out. We also don't need it, so I'm going to skip it. Organization units, if you are using organizational units in Zivver, because it's specific to organizational units in Zivver, you already know that and you already have it filled in. If you don't have it filled in, it's grayed out, and that's fine. We're just going to leave it at that. Then we have the next step, which is called the source filter. I have a filter enabled. If you don't, then don't worry, just leave it off. But I have a filter enabled on a security group. The security group is called all users, and this LDAP synchronization just synchronizes all my users that are a member of this group. Again, this should be transferred from the V1 configuration profile. If you're in doubt, then open up the Synctool configuration profile in V1 and transfer the information to this V2 profile. Then we have a new setting. It's called merge settings. It's not available here right now. We created this because we now allow for multiple sources. And if you have multiple sources, for example, an LDAP source and an Exchange source in one Synctool profile, the Synctool needs to know which one is the source of truth when they both have overlapping information. But since we just have one source here, which is the LDAP source, we don't need merge settings, so that's why there's no information here, and it shows a green check. So when we go to the data preview, we can just see if the LDAP connection and the filter still work. So I'm going to click load the data now, and it should load all my users that are a member of the all users security group, which it does. And what is new in this version is that you, of course, have the internal ID, but you can now more easily go about the information that you have. There's also a new search filter. So if you want to search for an account, you can just type it in here and it will show it automatically. And if you're coming from an old version of the Synctool and you're not synchronizing any proxy addresses yet, you'll see them in this column here. You can also click it so that it sorts all the accounts that have an email alias, and the same goes for delegations. So here you can see that, for example, the tomato has some delegations on the Agile bottom. If this is not sufficient information, you can also double click now, and this shows you all the attributes that the Synctool gets from Active Directory. This is not, of course, all synchronized to Zivver, so this all remains locally on your server, and you specify at the user tab which attributes are synced and which are remaining locally. But this is good for troubleshooting, so if you're wondering, hey, what kind of information is not synced, then you can double click a user if you see a table like this, and you can see some more in-depth information of where it is gathering its information from. So if you have also multiple sources, we have the preview sources tab, which will show you the overview of all the sources that you have. But in our case, we just have one LDAP source right now. So if I click load the data, it will show you the exact same 11 users that it showed previously. And in addition to the LDAP source, you might also have an Exchange source, which synchronizes your shared mailboxes to Zivver to be functional accounts. So I'm going to demonstrate the sources tab over there. So I'm going to click this button here, which brings me back to the main menu. And then we see the Exchange source. The source type is already displayed here, and it's also written down here, the shared mailbox synchronization. I'm just going to click that and jump straight to the sources. I'm going to unfold the Exchange source to show you what's new there. The details, they are the same as the LDAP details, of course, but the connection is a little bit different. So here we should also carry over your Synctool v1 configuration for Exchange on-premise. And so the Exchange address should look something like this, with the service account that's making the connection. In my case, And when I click the test connection, it should try and make a connection to Exchange on-premise from here. And it tries a get mailbox, as you can see here in the task pane. And after that, it shows me that the connection is successful. So that's nice. Then we go to groups. And here you see something new. So this is now by default, only the shared mailboxes are enabled because in 99.9% of the cases, only the shared mailbox types are synchronized to Zivver. If your organization also synchronizes groups or maybe a mail universal security group or a distribution group, then you can just select them here and click save. And what's also new is that you can now select the attributes, so the Exchange attributes that you want to synchronize to Zivver. You can leave it on by default. That means that the sync tool will grab automatically the right Exchange attributes for your shared accounts. And you can check if the right attributes are fetched by going to the data preview here. So I'm just going to load the data. So it's going to make a connection to Exchange on-premise and grab my shared mailboxes and display them here in the table so that I can check to see if the default values for these groups are sufficient. So it's going to grab the mailbox unique user identifier for the internal ID, which we discussed earlier and also will discuss in the syncing tab. The email address looks fine, just like the primary email address. The department name is something that looks fine as well. And if it doesn't for you, then you can change it to, for example, the display name. You can also see whether or not the shared mailbox is active or not. And we see that there are no aliases, but it does find some members, not for all mailboxes, but it does find some members. So, and if you want to double click that, then you can see which members are found. Those are these 3 members. You can also see the name, the status, and some other stuff. And again, this is all the data it grabs from Exchange, and that data remains locally because you specify yourself which data you synchronize to Zivver here at groups. So for me, the default values are correct. If that's not the case for you, and usually that is for the name of the shared mailbox, then you can change it to, for example, to be the display name for you. And if you're using an Excel file or a comma separated file as your input for the sync tool synchronization, it should automatically work. However, if you want to make use of the user mapping feature, which I do recommend using, you need to make one change to the comma separated file that you use. You need to add one extra column. And I'm going to show you how you do that. So here at the file selection, that should just be transferred from your original version 1 configuration profile. But if we go to preview sources and I'll load the data now, you can see that the internal ID is not being used. So the internal ID is a new feature which allows you to change the email addresses of your Zivver account without the sync tool losing touch with which email address belongs to which Zivver account. And if you're using our sync tool, our PowerShell export script, then you can just tweak it with 2 small changes in order to synchronize the internal ID or to export that also to the CSV file, because the PowerShell export script is already prepared for Synctool v2, and I'm going to show you how. If you're using another way to generate a Excel file or a CSV file, then this method might not work for you. So here we have our Exchange Online user export script, and I've already scrolled down a little bit to about line 60, and there you see, for me that's line 61, you see one row that's commented out. It's called internal ID and it says needed for Synctool v2. So we want to enable that. So I'm gonna remove the hashtag here, and that enables the internal ID here. And I'm gonna scroll a little bit down and I'm gonna see the same internal ID. I can of course also just copy it and find the next version here, which is a little bit down to row 100, so about 40 rows to the bottom. And I'm just going to remove the hashtag here as well. And that's it. So now I can just run the sync tool and it will try and create a new comma separated file like it normally does. And we can see when it's done, it's almost done. I have a small batch of accounts. We should now see that if I reload the data here, that the internal ID is mapped, and that means that we can use the user mapping feature in the Synctool syncing tab. So I'm just going to click reload now, and there you see that the GUID of the mailbox has now been filled in with the internal ID. So that's how you do that part. So after the sources, we're going to have a look at the syncing tab, and the first one is the user mapping. So the user mapping is a new feature. The feature maps the internal ID, which is the unique user identifier of a mailbox or an AD object, and it maps it to the unique user identifier of a Zivver account. And this information is stored locally here on the Windows machine, but this allows the sync tool to know which user belongs to which Zivver account. And that allows you to just change the email address, make a new primary email address, etc., without the sync tool losing touch with which user belongs to which email address. So we're going to create a mapping file. We're just going to click Browse, and in the sync tool folder, you're just going to create a new folder here in the structure. You can call it sync tool mapping or just mapping. I named mine sync tool mapping, and then you're just going to write down a file name. The file name being in this case the user mailbox synchronization or mapping. Actually, mapping is better. User mailbox mapping, and just click save, and then it's configured, and you don't need to worry about it anymore. Then we go to the synchronization options. So these should be already checked, but in my case they're not. So this is the user mailbox synchronization. So I'm going to enable all the synchronization options that we normally recommend when you work with user mailboxes, which is create new mailboxes, disable mailboxes that are suspended in your organization, and update existing mailboxes with Zivver. And we also have some new delete options here. So in the previous version in V1, there was a protection mechanism that did not allow you to delete more users than 5% of your total amount of users. This has now been removed. We've made it so that the delete option only deletes accounts when a manual synchronization is run, and you also get a prompt to confirm that you're fully aware that you're going to delete more than 5% of your user base. So you can just enable this also for the daily sync, because the daily sync will never delete users, because this is only enabled in a manual synchronization. And there's one extra layer which is always checked by default, and that is that the sync tool also looks in your source. So for example, in your Active Directory, and then it only deletes the Zivver accounts that are associated with AD objects that are also deleted in your source data. So If you have, for example, a bunch of accounts that are only suspended in your Active Directory, it won't delete those users when this check is also enabled, and it will only delete the users that are actually removed from your Active Directory or your mail server. So those are the synchronization options that you want to enable for the user mailbox sync. And then we have a couple of other tabs here, which are not really relevant for the update now. The relevant tab you will be referred to later when we are going to run our first manual sync. And after the sources, we're gonna check the synchronization options for the shared mailbox sync. So I'm just gonna open that. Here we have the user mapping, which is a new feature. This feature maps the unique identifier of a shared mailbox, in this case, the mailbox GUID, to the unique identifier of a Zivver functional account, so that you can change the email address of any shared mailbox however you like, without the sync tool losing touch with which email address is associated with which account. So we're just going to create a mapping file. I already created it earlier for the user sync, so we're going to create one now for the shared mailbox sync. So I'm going to go to the sync tool folder, and you should have already created a sync tool mapping file. If you haven't, create one now, double click it, and I'm just going to create a new file called shared mailbox mapping, and it's just going to sit next to the user mailbox mapping. I'm just going to click save, and there we go. Then we go to the synchronization options. These are not transferred from your Synctool v1 profile, so we're just going to enable them according to the best practice. So we're going to synchronize shared mailboxes here, which lead to functional accounts on the Zivver platform. So we're going to enable all these synchronization options, and we can also enable these delete all functional accounts that are disabled in Zivver. And if you leave this checked on, that means that the functional accounts that are actually deleted in your exchange, so no longer present there, will also be deleted on the Zivver platform. This will only be the case for manual synchronizations, and you will be prompted to confirm whether or not you want to delete a large amount of functional accounts. And please also check in the data preview tab to see whether or not these accounts can actually be deleted, because once deleted, you cannot return the data. And the same holds true for the LDAP profile. I'm just going to skip these view delta, preview changes, and review update tabs, as they will just demonstrate what will be synced when you are going to run a manual sync. And we are still going to run a manual sync, so I'll get to that later. So we've been through the entire configuration, and now we're going to run our first manual synchronization to see if the tool works as expected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click start here, and it's going to fetch all my data from the sources, compare it to my Zivver organization on the Zivver platform, and it's going to show me all the changes that it can do. So right now it says that the sync tool can add 5 more users to my Zivver organization. It can update 1, and it's going to disable 4 users. So now, of course, I'm curious who these users are and what's going to be changed. So it doesn't matter which one you click, but you click on Open Details here, and it's going to bring you to the tab for which you click the Open Details, and you can easily switch. So here I am at the updated user tab. So this shows me the list of all the users that are going to be updated. And if I make the column changes a little bit bigger, I can see what exactly is going to be updated. So in this case, there's going to be a delegation added to one of my user mailboxes. So that's looking fine. And you just want to check each tab and browse the changes column to see what's happening and why. So here we see the users disabled, so it's going to suspend some of my users. And if I, for example, double click this one, I can see that the from source is empty. So that means that this address is found in Zivver, but it's not found in my source, so it's not found in my Active Directory. So that means it should be removed, and therefore it will be. And the same should be true for the other one. The from source is empty, so it's not found by the sync tool given the source input that I gave it, and so it's gonna suspend a user, and that's usually the case when someone leaves service, of course. So in the final tab, we see the users added. 5 users are added, and you can just see by double clicking which data is coming from the LDAP source. So here we see the internal ID, the primary email address, the name, whether it's active or not, etc. And that's looking fine. So I'm just going to click back on the top here, and I need to click continue before I can actually run the synchronization because I've been to the verify changes tab. So I'm going to click continue, and now I'm going to click update now, and it will perform the changes. So in the bottom you can see where the sync tool is working, and at the end it will give you a result. So for me, 4 users have been added where 5 could be added, so that's probably the one that failed, and the others have been successfully changed. So when I click open details here again, I can see why this has failed, and this is because this is a protected account in my case, and the others are created just fine. The others are disabled as well, and this has been updated. So this first synchronization is complete. This is the user sync. So if you also have a shared mailbox sync, you can now move to that Synctool profile and repeat those steps. And after that, we're gonna configure the Synctool in to run, or for the automation to use the Synctool v2, so that you no longer need to use v1. But we're first gonna step over to the next tab, which is the logging tab. I'm just gonna close this one. Here we have the email reporting tab. That's not new. So this allows you to send email automatically if, for example, there are errors in your synchronization. So this was already present in version 1. So if you've configured it, then this should automatically be transferred to the v2 profile. You can just type in the SMTP relay host, type in the other configuration depending on your setup, and send a test email if you want. And then we move on to the event logging. So that's a fairly new tab. In V1, we had just one log file, and now we have events and logs, and also a separate summary log. So we do want to save the events, or at least I want to save the events. So I'm going to click Write Events to File, and then I'm going to browse to a folder that I want to store the events on. So I'm going to browse to my Synctool folder, which is in the documents. Again, this can be different for you. And here I've created a folder already, which is called logs. So I'm just going to click OK. And this means that if I run a Synctool or the task scheduler runs the Synctool, those events will be stored in this folder. And I'm going to use the same folder to store the summary file. There will be a separate file just with some data or more metadata about how many accounts have been suspended, how many accounts have been created, how many accounts have been updated, more a high level overview of a summary. So I'm just going to click browse here, and I'm just going to browse to the log folder, and I'm going to click open, and there I'm going to create a file called user mailbox synchronization summary, and I'm going to click save. And then we can go to the recent logs and recent events. Those will not contain a lot of information because I haven't run any sync yet, and the recent events will also be shown. So this is just a new way to show the logs and events of recently ran syncs. But if you run the sync tool, of course, scheduled, then you want to have the logs somewhere stored on your server, and that's why we enabled the event logging. So in your scenario, it could be that after the first manual synchronization, you receive a lot of errors. For example, errors about your aliases. And in that case, I do urge you to look at the Synctool documentation on docs.zivver.com, because we have a manual that helps you dissect the most frequent errors in your synchronization logs and how to fix those. And you can find the answers over there. But in case the sync tool doesn't work as you'd like and you want to keep using V1, the only thing you need to do is revert back the sync tool configuration. So here we have, for example, the two configuration profiles, and we made a backup at the beginning. So if the sync tool V2 is not working as expected, I'd like to hear your feedback, obviously. But what you want to do is you want to close off the sync tool, and you want to open up the backup sync tool profiles, select them both, copy them, and paste them over the files in your app data. And then you're all good to go. This is the sync tool version 1 configuration profile. It's being put back, and the automation hasn't been changed yet. So this means that version 1 will be used with the default configuration that you already had. And now you can just contact support with what's going wrong. So now we're at the point where Synctool V2 works as expected. And as you might know, the Synctool doesn't perform automated synchronizations by itself. It does so via the Windows Task Scheduler. So I've already grabbed my Windows Task Scheduler, and here you see the scheduled tasks that runs the Synctool on the daily basis. And there's one or two changes that you want to make if you want to make the task V2 ready. So there's no need to change anything in the general tab. Also, the triggers work just fine. The place where we want to make some changes are here in the action tab. So there are two parts of the action that you want to change. First off is, of course, the sync tool, because here it runs the executable that's associated with the previous version. And also in this specific configuration, we run two distinct sync tool profiles in one task, and that's not possible in Synctool version 2. So we need to split these actions up into two actions and point them to the Synctool V2. So I'm just going to show you how that's done. So you just right click the Synctool task and click properties, and we go to the action tab here. Actually, I think it would be easier just to delete this action and recreate new ones. So I'm just going to create a new one, and on the program script part, you're going to browse to the new sync tool. So we have Synctool V2 here, and I'm going to select the executable and click open. And then the arguments stay the same. So -s to run in silent mode, and -p to indicate that a configuration profile name is coming. So And what's also different is here you can specify just the name of the profile and the Synctool will grab it from the app data automatically. However, since this new version can grab the configuration profile from anywhere, you need to specify the complete path of the configuration. So I'm just going to grab that. I already had it open here. So here I'm in my app data and I want to use or run the user sync first because that's just best practice to use the sync or to sync the user mailbox first. So I hold shift on my keyboard and I right click the configuration and then I can access the copy as path option. I'm clicking that and I'm pasting that after the P, and this should paste the entire file path with double quotes around it in the argument. And that's looking nice. So I'm clicking OK. And I'm going to add a separate action here. I'm going to browse to the Synctool executable again. And the arguments are the same. So -s, -p, and then I'm going to grab the full path to the shared mailbox synchronization, which is the second profile I want to run. Hold shift, right click, and click copy as path. I'm going to paste it here. I'm just going to double check that it's the other profile, and it is. It says shared mailbox. So I'm going to click OK again, and I need to enter the password from my service account, which I have on my clipboard here. Click OK, and there you go. This is how you update the automation. And if we now click the Synctool task, you can see that it's grabbing the Synctool 2.0 executable, and it points to the profile mentioned in the app data of my user. And after we have updated the Synctool automation, we can archive the old Synctool v1 and use the v2 from now. So if you have it stored somewhere in your folder, you can create an archive folder and place the executable there, or you can just let it live here or delete it altogether. You can, or I recommend to keep it stored here in case of trouble. It doesn't take up a lot of space, but if you want to clean up, then you can remove it from the Synctool versions that you have from your workspace. All ties should be removed now, as the Synctool configuration profiles have been updated to support v2, and also with the update of the scheduled task, that means that v1 is not being used anymore. So actually that's it for the update process. You've now updated the Synctool from v1 to v2, and if you have any feedback regarding the update process, please let us know via support@zivver.com, and we'd be happy to help.